Next exciting thing is to learn to knit an Intarsia heart. I knitted 2 of them for this sampler. One turned into a coaster, and one is on one of the keyhole scarf. The white yarn and the turquoise background yarn here are not identical yarns, but they're very, very close to the same weight. And you can see that leaves the heart not perfectly filled in. So on the coaster, I did something additional that can help if you want a fuller, plusher heart. And that is I used 3 strands of Caron Simply Soft held together as though they were a single strand. The blue background yarn is Bernay Softy Chunky, which is a thick yarn, but the pink composite is a little bit thicker. The sampler's coming along nicely. Now let's try an Intarsia heart. We're going to start with a single stitch centered on the work. There really isn't a true center because it's 16 stitches wide, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll have to use either stitch 8 or stitch 9 and call that close enough. And wrap both sides and let the yarn come out next to the stitch. The remainder of the row will wrap like normal stockinette, but we must skip the stitch that's white. So there's a little bit of adjusting as we zig and zag back and forth. But as much as possible, we're keeping the normal wrap for the background stitches. The difference between Fair Isle and Intarsia is an Intarsia motif is a single motif that takes place on the fabric, and the yarn that is involved in that motif does not get carried across the entire space. Fair Isle is repetitive across the row, so both yarns cross the entire row, every row. There is more than one way to accomplish each of them. So if you have a method that you're already enjoying, do not feel that seeing this makes you wrong, because it doesn't. You may be having good results with another method, and that's fine. I'm showing you one that is suited to this particular project. So that row is complete. We have our working yarn. Here's the same row wrapped and ready to knit over on the coaster. In this case, we were able to center perfectly because it is 11 stitches wide. Hearts get wider as they go up from the point. So we're going to wrap 3 stitches this time and let the yarn come out next to one of them. And I'm going to knit over one back one just to lock that white yarn in position so I don't have to worry about it getting sloppy. And do a pretty normal stockinette wrap, but skip the 3 contrasting stitches. You do have to exert yourself a little bit to double check that every peg truly got wrapped. Since we're interrupting our pattern, it's easier to make a mistake than it normally would be. But the row knits over normally. Here's the same row wrapped for the coaster. The third row of the heart is just like the second, except for since the yarn was over here to the right and we want to wrap the same stitches, this time I worked from right to left. That's somewhat optional. You could have crossed the loom. And one of the things that you can do is what I'm doing this row. Doesn't change anything. I'm just knitting all the white stitches off before I wrap, making sure the yarn comes out next to those stitches again, those white stitches. And stockinette wrap, skipping the white stitches in the pattern. Making extra careful sure that every peg does get a wrap. And this row will now be knitted over normally. Of course, these 3 are already knitted. And of course, when knitting over the tripled yarn, 3 strands knit over 3 strands. Don't let yourself get confused if you use my little heart plumping trick. Before I finish up here, I know that I'm going to want to make 5 white stitches this next row. So before knitting this loop over, if I move the yarn, the white yarn, it's going to make the wrap that much easier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And stockinette wrap on the remaining stitches. That's the last of the blues till we cross. Make sure no pegs get missed. That's the last blue next to this white. Cross over. Looks like everybody got wrapped, so we'll knit over. And the coaster's ready to knit over also. This row, let's try widening to 7 stitches of white. And as with all the other rows, the blue will continue the stockinette wrap as best it can with a gap in the middle where the white stitches are taking up the space. Then we'll knit over as usual. And here is the same row wrapped and ready to knit on the coaster. This row, the heart will remain 7 stitches wide, but we'll work 1, 2, 3 white ones, then skip a peg and make that peg blue stitch because the heart begins to dip in the center. Just locking that into place. Let me pull out a little slack in the blue yarn and we'll still work the stockinette wrap, but we're getting fancy. Catch this, across, coming back, and yay, we'll be able to catch the other center peg and keep the pattern going. And now knit everything over. And here's this row wrapped and ready to knit over on the coaster. Final heart row. These outer white stitches won't be white this row. Next 2 will. Center one won't, because that's for blue. Next 2 white. I will lock that into place. And we can actually break this yarn now and use my little trick that I like to use. Knotting a loop into it. And hanging it on a stitch of the same color so it will be locked inside the fabric. Now, stockinette wrap. Remember, this returns to blue. So it's a blue stitch where there was a white one last row. Same here. And coming back, make extra sure nobody gets left out. This is supposed to be, nope, that is supposed to be a white stitch this row, and it is wrapped. So this should be coming to the center, and it is. And this stitch, which is reverting to blue, though it was white, and now we're out of the woods. So I'm going to knit these over and knit a few rows to let the heart come down so you can have a peek at it. Here are both finished heart projects. The notes alongside the picture are a very basic form of pattern that you can use to reproduce the project. Complete pattern notes for this and the other things in the sampler and charts for things like the heart are available to those who use the Answer Lady and Friends app, and those are free to app users.